Welcome to the Daily Recall Show. I'm your host, Vasily, and today I will talk about how to use your brain to actually solve complex problems without getting really stuck. Because I believe that most people don't actually have a good idea on how to use their brains. It's sort of like the missing manual, right? There is a manual to how to use this thing that we really haven't actually checked out yet. So that's what I want to cover today, how to use this thing. And there is a very simple idea that will help us do that. Because in the past couple episodes, we've done a really good deal of talking on how to solve problems, how to solve complex problems, different methods of doing that, visualizations, process hierarchy, all those things. But how do you actually do that? Like when you sit down and there is a problem, any kind of problem, which is to write an article, which is to solve a math equation or to invent a new business, any kind of problem, how do you do that? Okay? And the very simple idea that will help you to solve problems without getting stuck is basically the understanding that there are two different types or modes of thinking in your head. Okay? And we got to account for that because that's really what we are comprised of. That's our fundamental human capability. And when most people do not account for that, they really screw themselves up badly because they are trying to use their own heads in the way that they're not supposed to be used. Okay? So we gotta prevent that. We gotta learn how to use that, and that's what this today's episode is about. So I'm really stoked about it. And to begin, I want to explain the two different modes of thinking. Okay, so the first mode that we've got, it's called kind of the focused mode. Okay, and just to be clear, these modes do not really exist, but that's a very nice metaphor to explain how the brain works and how to use that. So you don't have to know neurobiology and all that stuff, but you can just use this thing by knowing what these modes are. Okay, so the two modes are the focused mode and the diffuse mode. And the first one, the focused mode, is basically when you focus specifically on the problem, okay? And the way you do this focusing is by narrowing down using your sensory channels, which might be your eyes, your ears, or narrowing down and focusing through your sensory channels on the thing. An example would be that you're solving a math equation, okay? So there is a thing, there is an equation written down on a piece of paper, and then you focus on that equation through your eyes, and that's how you get into this focused mode. Cool? So the focused mode is a really powerful thing because the way it works is that if we take this math equation, is that when you look at the math equation, it might be really simple, like 2 plus 2, something like that, okay? What happens is that in your brain, a specific area, a specific chain of neurons lights up that is responsible for solving, for dealing with this kind of problems, okay? So for the math problem example, that would be sort of algebra or like simple math, how to multiply, how to add things, that kind of stuff. And that is really useful because by like learning how to do these things, we get to build these tiny areas very intertwined, interconnected neurons that help us solve problems. But the problem with the focused mode is that you only got access to this very tiny network of neurons that is responsible for dealing with the specific problem at hand. Okay? And usually in life, problems are not that simple as 2 plus 2. Okay? And if you only solve problems when you are in the focused mode, when you're like sitting or with a pen or with a computer and you're trying to like really hard to write an article or solve a problem, especially a really creative problem, that's not going to work. Because to solve a creative problem, you got to pull from many different sources. You got to like have access to your whole brain of sorts, okay? And that is why you need the second mode of thinking, which is the diffuse mode. And a good analogy would be a pinball machine. So a focused mode is like a pinball machine where you've got those bumpers really tight together. So when you launch the ball, it kind of like just trembles between those bumpers and they're really, really tight, okay? And you use the flippers to keep launching the ball and keep launching the ball and keep launching the ball. But if you let the flippers go, if you switch from the focus mode, there is kind of a second layer here, which is the second pinball machine, which is the diffuse mode. And in the diffuse mode of thinking, their bumpers are really, really far away from each other. So those bumpers kind of represent neurons in that sense. And when you are in the diffuse mode, you have access to your whole thing that's out there. All your knowledge, all your implicit memories, events that happen to you, all your things that you have memorized in school, learned, understood from someone else, like all that thing, okay? And that is why it's extremely useful to do the switching thing, because you cannot really solve a complex problem, especially if a problem requires a completely different approach, a different mode of thinking, a different view on a thing, just by being in the focused mode, okay? So just to be clear, focused mode, neurons are very tight. You get access to a specific program in your brain which helps you to deal with the situation at hand, but you do not have access to your whole thing, okay? Diffuse mode, neurons are really, really far away from each other. You have access to many, many different areas of the brain, but you're not focused on anything specific. And the way to enter the diffuse mode of thinking is by doing an activity that is actually very involving, okay? So where you perform as a reactor or as a proactor. An example of that would be walking around and just like browsing the sites, or having lunch, or listening to someone, or participating in a conversation, when you're not thinking about anything in particular. So that is the diffuse mode, when you're not thinking about anything in particular, okay? So a nice mnemonic for that would be that focus mode is when the eyes are on the prize, and the diffuse mode is when the eyes are on the flies that are like flying around out there, okay? When you're looking at the window and you see this beautiful sky and the birds flying, that's the diffuse mode. You're not thinking about anything in particular, about any specific problem. And the best way to solve problems is to switch between modes. That's such an easy idea. Because when you do your focused mode work, when you sit down, you've got a problem at hand, it's written on a piece of paper, you focus on the problem, you do your best, right? But then you let the thing go and you do the diffuse mode activity. So my favorite four are walking, just walking and browsing things around and looking at things, looking at people, staring at clouds and stuff like that. Then working out, that's really useful for many different reasons, but it actually switches your modes really well. Then having lunch, that works extremely well for me. So whenever I get stuck, I just go and have lunch, okay? And the fourth one would be just quickly reading through stuff. So if I have like a book or a magazine, I'm just quickly reading through stuff, that also switches my attention really well, because I present myself with many, many, many different objects at hand. So those are the two different modes of thinking. And whenever you get stuck, it actually might happen for two reasons. The first reason, which is actually a really popular one, is that you have not done your homework, meaning that you haven't actually prepared yourself to solve the problem that you need to solve, okay? So an example of that would be in the math class. If you don't know how to solve the problem, that's probably because you haven't learned the formulas yet, right? And in many different areas of life, that's actually the case. So you haven't done like the focused mode preparing work yet. But the second reason, also a very popular one, might be that you're just trying too hard, okay? And trying too hard is actually a problem because you do not have access to this different parts of your brain, and you're like only seeing this from a very, very narrow perspective of the focused mode. So that's going to be a really big problem. And just to recap, two modes of thinking. Focused mode, when eyes are on the prize, you focus narrowly through your eyes or other sensory channels on the thing at hand. It runs a specific program in your brain which is responsible for dealing with this kind of stuff, okay? The diffuse mode, when eyes are on the flies and you're not thinking about anything in particular. And the best way is when you're doing something different, like different activity that is involving your attention, okay? Another good one would be when you're driving around or just sitting in the car and watching the things passing by. That's a good one as well. And the best way to solve problems is to do a short focused mode work, like 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then quickly switch modes. Just go out for 5 to 10 minutes. That's enough to switch your modes of thinking. And then once you come back, you will see things differently. So that's how you solve problems. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you guys tomorrow.